meeting is being recorded.
So I think I
He
was telling
talked
you
me into
this.
it.
Yeah, I think I was telling you this after the break, or after we took a little bit of a break. I think North Korea is probably the biggest one who I think could um, really kind of do something out of that block that could really change the status quo. I think they'd be ballsy enough to do it. I think Ukraine. I think Russia's very strategic, and I think China's very risk adverse. Um, and I think they would be the ones who would kind of change, kind of like bring everyone else into it, not by choice. But at the same time, it's like you have to have China and Russia be on the same side of that issue with you, or nothing's going to happen. Like I think North Korea is only will only be viable as long as one of the two survives, and there's not really much we can do about that because I don't think we could get China and Russia on the same page about what what's going on in North Korea.
I thought when you asked me that, I thought you meant like which had the most like power. Which,
No, I mean,
I get what you're saying now. I kind of, and I do agree with you in terms of the like, out of the three, who's the most likely to do something? Yeah, I would agree. North Korea. Now,
and now I think what you said about Cuba and Venezuela, I think is probably very possible. I think that's so close to the United States, and I think they're just like so weak. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of did some CIA shit and like, oh hey, like now Cuba's like a little bit more democratic and like a little bit more aligned towards the United States, and be like, oh, that's interesting how that happened. And Venezuela, I think would be the same thing, almost as like a second. And I think it'd be really good because you think about you know how are you going to get oil? You've got oil in Canada and everything like that, but now they're going to want a second supply, and it's going to be down in Venezuela. And I think that's why they're kind of like, okay, like we should bring Venezuela in because I think it's also going to be the gateway into getting the rest of South America to develop. So I 100% agree with you on that.
as far as like,
And Marco Rubio is a Cuban, right? Isn't he Cuban?
yeah, he's cute. And he's a huge, huge
I
hawk,
was gonna say, so
especially.
like I knew he was Cuban, but I was like, I want to make sure. But it's like, yeah, then you got Marco Rubio as being Cuban. Like, you don't think, he's gonna want anything going on down there. He's going to.
And yeah, I agree. Like in terms of like the, I guess we're calling it the Axis now. I guess we can't come up with a new name for them.
Yeah.
But as far as like those out of those guys, yeah, I agree. North Korea could potentially do something crazy, but
But I
I
could see like a 5 to 6 year time period from now where Cuba, Venezuela, and Iran both just kind of like collapse, and where or like are shifted more into the U.S. sphere, and I could see like Russia being like that next leg to where it's like, okay, that would completely subjugate China, you know?
that's probably the goal.
Hmm.
I would say, but now well, the other thing you got to worry about, and I'm going to throw this out there, since we're kind of agreeing North Korea has the chance to do something crazy, but so, and I know Colby's seen it because I sent it to him. uh, so it came out last few days. The Chinese have started building some very specific things in Fujian, which is the province they have right across from Taiwan. I think it's in Fujian. I might be wrong on that. Um, they're building landing ships, the type that you would use in an invasion. They've started suddenly in the last few months because they've now got satellite photos showing it, and they're also building. I can't remember what the official term is for it, but it's comparable to what we built before we did D-Day. We called them mulberry harbors, which are kind of like these artificial harbors you can park off land. If you don't have access to an actual harbor, you can park them off the beach and use them until you get an actual harbor you can use. They
Hmm.
started building those too. And this, like the point, like one of the people I follow and made a good point is like they only just started building this. Like we have regular satellite photos you can get like from civilian satellites, not even taking like military satellites. You can get those through like Maxar and stuff like that. So he's like they've really just started this at least within the last I think the estimate they gave was like they started building these in like the last 3 months or so. So
Mhm.
they're suddenly building a lot of landing ships, building artificial harbors. There's really no other reason to be building that unless they're about to make a play. Now, I don't think that's soon. If they've just started building these ships, that's kind of more of a first step for that. But it does, a lot of people I've seen kind of made the points like, okay, if they're actually starting to do this, then maybe, maybe not 2025, but maybe 2026, 2027. The date everybody's been watching for is 2027. And all of a
I
sudden
thought it
they're
was
doing it.
2025.
So it's called the Davidson window, and the original estimate he gave is named after Admiral Davidson. I think he gave the testimony in, I think it was before Congress in like 2021. I could be wrong on that, but his estimate was like 2027 is when they claim they think the Chinese are going to make a play for Taiwan. So 2027. Now there was Air Force General. I think this is where he got 2025 from because I remember that back in like January or February of 2023, this Air Force General was saying he was thinking it could be 2025.
Well,
So,
so
and
I know what you're talking about, and I know he said that. But I
mhm,
thought a bunch of other people who were analysts were like, yeah, like I think in 2025 is when they would do it. Now, one of the big reasons why is they thought there would be a lot of political upheaval,
mhm.
and they thought that Donald Trump
I,
coming back into the White House would kind of cement, like, hey, like this would be a good time to do it.
yeah,
And now
and
I thought I remember hearing it was like somewhere where it was like early maybe 2020s is when it was like kind of like that window you were saying. But I thought it kind of went all the way out to like 2030 something where it's like they could do something. Maybe it was like 2032 or something like that. But
yeah.
it was like about a 10-year window where they could actually try to do something.
So in the 2010s, that was the window. Was the Everybody thought it'd be the early 2030s, like 2032. That was the date a lot of people said, and then it got shrunk in the early 2020s to 2027. And then I do know what you're talking about. I think it was the Atlantic Council had done like a round table or whatever with like China, quote unquote China experts and stuff, and they were kind of like, yeah, we expect them to kind of do something. Maybe not an invasion, but maybe like something with Taiwan. I don't know if they said blockade, but they thought there might be some. China might try something. I think it was last year or this year. So I think that might be what you're referring to. Because remember the Atlantic Council had done something on that, and then like I said, that Air Force general was saying he thought there might be something happening in 2025. So if they're just now, I mean, they've got the naval might to do it. Back in 2022, the Seventh Fleet commander said he thought they had the capabilities now to do a blockade of Taiwan. So that was 3 years ago now.
But would we
So
just do like a Berlin airlift kind of a thing and just kind of like just start dumping material over there if they do a blockade?
there is
Because I mean,
that.
if you can do a blockade and not do a no-fly zone.
So I honest. Okay, let me
I
try
guess
to
for
think
me,
how
it's
it
like,
works.
okay, how much do they want to commit?
Yeah,
Like Stalin also was like, hey, like we're not letting anything in out of Berlin, East Berlin or what, or yeah, East Berlin, or maybe was it West Berlin? I don't. Berlin when the
yeah,
Allied
Berlin.
section of it, and um, like so the United States is like, okay, we'll just start dropping air, material and stuff. So like people do that all the time, but it's just kind of like, okay, like what limits are you going to put? And now we're also
So
feeding Taiwan, which is probably what like 10, 20 million people.
yeah, there's not enough airlift capacity.
No.
So if they do a blockade, the Taiwanese, I think October. So this October, they were like publicly like, yeah, if they do a blockade, I think that's probably why they publicly announced this too, because like I said, there was some reporting that the Chinese might try something. Um, the Taiwanese have said if they do a blockade, that is an act of war. They will consider it the start of a war. So they were kind of throwing the gauntlet down by laying that on it. And realistically speaking, if they launch a blockade, we would have to, unless we want Taiwan to capitulate, we would have to throw in naval forces to try to break it because there's just not enough. You could take every single air cargo transport in the world, and there's just no way you can feed 10, 20 million people with just airplanes because the entire airlift capacity of the United States Air Force, which is considerable, is basically the same amount you can get on a single like super max freighter. like all that air capacity. It's comparable to like one large ship in terms of like tonnage it can move. So
Yeah,
I mean,
but if
there's
you
just
got
no,
them going every day, you
if
know.
you well, you would basically need to fly them so much that they would start dropping out of the air from like lack of maintenance, crew exhaustion, that
Well,
sort of
yeah,
stuff.
I mean, it would be a short-term fix, 100%. And then, some domestic supply would have to be, required
The
as well.
estimates, I think the U.S. Navy had done an estimate, and they were like, yeah, if they launch a blockade, based on what they have on the island, they have enough food for like 6 weeks, and I think enough oil, I think natural gas for like 4 to 6 weeks.
Hmm.
So it's like, yeah, maybe we could fly in enough food to extend that out to like 8 weeks, but it's like if they run out of gas and stuff, like that's, it's a big difference. Yeah, it doesn't matter at that point anyway. So I mean, like if they do something like that, then yeah, we would have to commit that Navy to like trying to break a blockade. And at that point, it's World War III. I mean, I
Well,
know
so
they're, I know,
so so let's tie this back to the Russian and European debate and where do they fit in on this? Do you think that Russia, what Russia's doing prevents China from aggression? It's like
and
the Russian war in Ukraine, does that prevent Chinese aggression in Asia?
no, I've seen some people try claiming that argument, but I just don't see any real evidence
I
for it
guess I'm just
because
thinking like if I was China and be like, hey, like I need Russia and like bought in on this and need them to kind of at least be willing to help me out and they're stretched thin and so we're having to help them out. Like that makes it hard for me to wage war against Taiwan. You know what I'm
well,
saying?
yeah, I mean, I get the argument, but like, I mean, to put it in this perspective, after Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. committed to sending like 100,000 troops to Europe. So it's like, yeah, even if the Russians aren't directly participating in a Taiwan conflict, and I don't personally think they will, and I've not seen any official war games or studies or stuff, or I've not heard any talk that like they expect the Russians to directly support the Chinese. Most of the assumptions is they'll indirectly support, like they'll do. Hey, China, here's all this extra oil you guys will need because you'll need gas for this or that. I've not seen anybody suggest like, oh, the Russians might send their Pacific Fleet to help or something.
No, I don't think
So
they're gonna throw bodies at it, but I could
yeah,
see them sending material.
yeah, and I don't think there's anything really preventing them from doing that even now because it's like they've got plenty of oil for their war effort in Ukraine. I think the main thing China needs is raw resources, and I think the Russians can
Yeah,
do that.
yeah, but I feel like there is some hesitation with Russia because it's like, hey, like although we do have oil and stuff like that, like we can't just keep like we're politically kind of in a precarious position here, and like we don't want to be stretched any thinner or have any lack of resources that we can be using to sell or whatever it is. Like we don't want to have we don't want to have be put in that position. And so I feel like that's where they might be like, well, like, hey, now's not really a great time, and like you're going to be asking for a lot more material than we're asking from China to go to Ukraine. You know what I mean? And so like it's a completely different story, and that's a much higher aggression. And I'm almost just kind of like, if I was Russia, I'd be like, hey, like we don't want any part of that. Like we can't give you what you want, and we don't want to be dragged into something where we don't have any power to back out of.
I think, insofar as like again, I don't think they're going to do anything direct, but I think the way I would look at it is like World War II in the sense that like Japan attacked the United States and then Germany joined in because it's
Hmm.
like if the U.S. is divided between fighting Japan and Germany, that means they can't be focused solely on Germany or they can't be solely focused on Japan. And I think if Moscow is sitting there, like, I don't think they're really going to care either way. I've not really heard any rumblings that they really care either way because I think it's like I said, like after Ukraine, we sent like 100,000. We like increased our presence in Europe, or at least we claimed we were going to increase our presence in Europe to like 100,000 guys, and then obviously while the Russians are there, that's keeping all of like European NATO tied down. So it's like if suddenly China attacks Taiwan, I mean that's good for China in the sense that like okay, most of NATO's military forces are focused in Europe, so that clears our way. And for the Russians, that really doesn't change anything, at least at first. But then if they do if the U.S. has focused all of its material efforts instead of supplying Ukraine, now it's focused on supplying Japan, it's focused on supplying Taiwan or the Philippines or whatever. That means, that eventually will help the Russians because then it's like, okay, the Ukrainians don't have the munitions or the vehicles or this or that they need, and then you know
So, but
anything that
you're assuming that Europe wouldn't step in to take over the United States contributions in Europe.
I'm sure they would, or at
But
least
do
that
you
would be
think they'd
the
be as successful?
no, not at all. That's kind of where I'm coming from with that because
Okay.
it's like even if Europe doesn't send gear to help in the Pacific, which they claim they will, I don't really buy it. But even if let's,
I would say what's it, AUKUS? That's about all you're getting. You know,
yeah,
you might get some naval ships from Great Britain and France just because like they're not going to need them in Europe, and so it's like here, take them. But you're not going to get much more than that.
well, and then two, they've things have gotten so like hairy in the Pacific, or at least I think you can call it, or at least or whatever you want to call it. We'll leave the adjectives out of it. Uh, they've started sending German naval frigates over there, and they're trying to get the Italians to start doing the same. So I
Hmm.
mean, they're trying to get any ship they can over there. So, but even I mean, so even if like Europe was like, okay, we'll take over, focus on Ukraine. Most of the aid has come from us to Ukraine, just because the Europeans, like the British Army literally cleared out most of their artillery. I think they have like 20 pieces of artillery now. And by pieces, I mean like individual artillery, like units. And the Danish sent most there. So, I mean, like, even
That's
if
just because they're
tomorrow,
not. That's just because they're not leaning into guns. They're still trying to do butter, right?
yeah. And I mean, it takes time to get that ramped up. And I mean, the point I've always made is like, okay, if we stop supplying Ukraine tomorrow, even if Europe got their shit together and then was like full on war, we got to do this and that, it's going to take them at least a couple of years to get ramped back
Oh yeah.
up. I mean, so I mean, like the Ukrainians can't wait a couple of years.
Well, that's what worries me about the United States is I don't think we're in a position. This is why I sent that message about the state capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that that's kind of been like this thing I've kind of had in my back in the back of my mind. And I was watching there's like some ships act or whatever that they did recently, and it was kind of focused on that of like basically being like, hey, like we're like the federal government in these bills are allocating money so that we can produce ships more domestically and we can build them quicker and try to be more efficient and stuff like that. Now, it's obviously going to take a while for that to really kind of start working its way in, but it's like one of the issues that people are saying, and I agree with, that we're seeing in Ukraine is it's like we're barely fitting that need for Russia. And so it's like, okay, like, yeah, you got to get Ukraine up to where we're at now. But where we're at now, we've got to go like tenfold to match what we're doing in China. And it's like we do not like have like I always tell people this is an example. It's like, okay, let's say we want to make more bullets. Okay. We need more presses, more machinery, we need blah 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 blah. And it's like if you've ever had to build that shit or be on a team that has built that shit, you're looking at least a year to get some of that equipment. And you're talking about you're going to need thousands of them. And then you're going to need all the raw materials. And then you're going to need all the brass. You're going to need all the steel. You're going to need all this other kind of shit. And it's like, right now, it would take us at least 5 years of dedicated effort to get up to the point where we need to be, where we can actually supply Asia if there was an aggression from China. And it's like now you need Europe to get to where we're at now, and we got to get above there, and it's a heavy investment, and I don't think we're ready for it, and we need to start kind of building the capacity to do that, whether it's through automation or whatever. But we got to do more.
Well, make a point on the ships real fast because I know the exact act you're talking about. Some people I follow were pretty heavily involved in that,
Hmm.
and like the point they made was which was really good. It's like if you go look at terms of like percentage of like global shipbuilding capacity, Russia has a higher like civilian shipbuilding sector than we do. Like they could actually produce more civilian ships.
Well, and we
So I
get a
mean
lot
that's
of ours apparently from like South Korea.
yeah no like so,
It's like, oh, so if North Korea kind of comes in and invades, we lose. And I think a lot of them were like cruisers or like, like destroyers. It's like, oh yeah, like there goes that critical backbone of any naval fleet is gone because we had been producing all that shit in Korea, and now it's taken over and now it's being bombed to hell. by North Korea and its allies. It's like oh, like that's not good, you know?
Yeah, like South Korea and Japan are like, I think combined are like 40% or
Yeah, something like
44% of
that.
global, and then China's like 50.3% or something.
Hmm.
So it's like that remaining like 5 or 6% is the rest of the world of which we're a
Yeah,
part.
it's crazy,
And
dude.
it's like you stop and that's the point I've always made with people. It's like you stop and you the most dramatic way I can do this is I pull up a map of like Chinese missile ranges,
Hmm.
and it's like, every single one of these shipyards in South Korea and Japan is like within range of like their not just their long range missiles, but their medium and like some of their short range systems.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, like guys, like
Well, that's to bring it to Europe. That's why I'm like, hey, if Europe could take 5% of what it sent to China and take that back, like that's not nothing. Like when you're talking about like, oh, we're taking 5% out of a country that's got 50 plus percent uh, capacity in this critical thing that we're going to need for production. Taking 5% of that when we've got like nothing is a significant amount, and it's especially in something like shipbuilding, it's critical. But it's like in so many other sectors, like you want to talk about building the industrial base. Like if we did bring a lot of those ships here back to the United States and developing them, it's like okay, like think about the jobs and everything like that that can really happen and the people you can deploy. I think personally, I think I don't want to make this an immigration thing, but I think immigration would be kind of a different story when it's like, hey, we need people to start building all these ships and we don't have the people. Like I think immigration would be like a completely different story. But we need to get that back here to the United States. And we just don't have the capacity to wage war right now. And I honestly don't know if society would be ready for something like that. Like, I don't think American society is at a point where it's like, oh, you're gonna stop going to your job and you're gonna start working in the logistics department of the military and like doing logistics and supply chain and stuff like that. Like that's now your job now, Austin. I think like people would be like, what? Like what the fuck? Like this is just completely different. And I think we're just so war adverse to where I feel like we just don't even want to build up our capacity because we don't want to suffer the daily lives of normal people to deal with that.
well, to give some data. I mean, you're saying everything that I agree with, so like I'm 100% on board with you so
Yep.
far. But to give some data to this, so back, and I can send it to you. So it came out back, I think it was last summer. DoD had done like a study based on like the loss rates they were seeing in like the Ukraine war, and they came to the conclusion like, okay, if we actually got into like a high intensity war like we're seeing in Ukraine, so let's say a Pacific conflict, they came to the conclusion they would be losing either dead or like wounded like 3,600 people a day.
Yeah.
That is so basically within a week we would have lost like more than we lost in all the war on terror.
Yeah.
Within a month, we're talking Vietnam.
Oh yeah.
And they came and like what the final conclusion of the study was like, yeah, there's just no way we can plausibly sustain this. We would have to institute a draft and everything. There's just no other. It's either that or we would literally be falling apart within like a month or two.
Well, and
And
the thing is even with that, like one thing I tell people about the United States is I was like, we got lucky in both World War One and World War Two because we came in at the very end of the war, or like towards the end of the war. And it's like we didn't suffer some of the worst casualties. But I'm like, now that America is the superpower and we have to get involved, we're gonna be taking a shit ton of those losses up front to where, like you said, like people aren't going to realize this, but it's like, oh yeah, we had a Vietnam 12 times this year for the next 4 or 5 years. And it's like people are not going to realize, like, oh, like, what does that actually mean? It's like, oh, well, we're talking about like what, like 6, 7 million people dead, at least. And it's like what the fuck? Like that, like people just can't comprehend that because we've never had to be at a position in society like that. But when you look at the people who fought in World War One, like the United Kingdom was like
is
scarred for that for life because they were like yeah, like you sent whole villages to war and they never came back.
the average height of the British man actually decreased by an inch and has never recovered because of World War One.
Yeah.
Because originally the army would only take you if you had a but like were above a certain height.
Hmm.
So then like they did that, and then like so many of those guys got killed. Like the British population is now like an inch shorter than it should be,
Yeah.
which is crazy to think it had that big of an effect. And then two, like take it back to like a modern American context. So like I said, like DOD is claiming like, yeah, we're going to be taking like basically 4,000 casualties
Yeah.
a day, either dead or wounded. So like they said, like we need a draft, but then like the studies they've been doing here recently is like, I think it's like Gen Z is now like saying like they only consider patriotism like a good value, and like I think it's like 27% when asked in polls or something. There's just there's not the like in World War II, World War One, like people still have this conception of being like a really patriotic American, like yeah, I'll go if they send me, and now it's like that sense just isn't there nowadays. So it's like there's
And
how are
I
you
think
going
that's the
to?
biggest issue Europe has too, where
Oh
it's
yeah,
like, why the fuck am I gonna like why do we want to have this aggression towards Russia? Like I don't want to go and like fight those people. Like, like why I don't want to do that shit.
how are you going to justify 4,000 casualties a day?
Yeah.
Like that's a serious
Especially when your
question.
population is stagnant or decreasing already. It's like, yeah, I don't know if we can do that.
And there's been several army states like they're well aware of this, and they're kind of like behind closed doors. They're pretty freaked out about it. Like
Yeah.
publicly, they don't like talking about it, but it's like everything I hear is like the mid level people. So like your colonels or your like high ranking staffers are like, dude, if this starts, we're actually fucked. Like that's kind of
Well,
like
and it's interesting because it's all across the world. I mean, China's gonna have what 800 million people in 20 years, right? And it's like, okay, like you're gonna have significant decreases in your population. And now you say, let's send all those people off to war, and you're gonna kill, say, a third of them or a quarter of them. It's like, okay, think about like how few more people you would have then. Like you probably only have like 600 million people if you came out on the good end of it. Like people will like I don't know if China could recover from something like that. Like having this huge demographic collapse and then just further just like death and destruction to where you're gonna have 100 million people die. And it's like, yeah, like that's probably not gonna be like that's just I think that would break China. And it'd be like I think their civilization would probably end. But I don't know. I mean, that's probably maybe a little hyperbolic, but
I think it depends on how exactly we'll. I hate saying it because it's become so cliche for people to like, oh, we're starting World War III or something like that. But I mean, like realistically, like a conflict between the U.S. and China at this point would be a World War III situation. I think a lot of it would depend upon how it's fought because I mean, like World War II is given who all was involved in that, there was certain lesser standards for trying to minimize, civilian casualties or stuff. So I mean, it
yeah.
kind of would depend, or would everybody, I will give credit. Both sides in the Ukraine war have shown a relatively, as much as could be expected, I guess, decent efforts to minimize civilian casualties.
Yeah, but
Like,
that's kind of like I mean they're kind of like skirmishes, right? They're not like detailed battle plans, and you're talking about Ukraine where significant portions of the population fled. Now being like, hey, like you can't go anywhere, like in China being like you're not going anywhere, like a
yeah,
lot of those people are gonna
that's
stay, and you're gonna have all of them killed.
so. I mean, like so far in Ukraine, I think that UN estimate's been like 100,000 civilians now, which is not trying to minimize that at all. But I mean, comparatively to like
Oh
World
yeah,
War
that's
II,
pretty
where
good.
like like World War II is like 30 million died in the
Iraq.
USSR. Like Iraq. I think it was like
I thought they were like almost like a quarter million at least.
yeah, it was something. It was like I was about to say 400,000. I thought, but
But like you said,
250,000.
it's like crazy. It's like, oh yeah, like only a quarter million people died during the 7 years we were there. It's
So
like that's not that bad.
which it's kind of sad, but I mean,
Quit
there's this
resisting.
yeah, there was this one really good book about the World War II in the Pacific. It's called Hell to Pay. It's got
Oh
by
yeah,
this guy named like Guynrico, and like the point he makes is like the last year of the war, like 400,000 people were dying every month. So it's like but by historical standards, say if it was 400,000, like I thought, over the course of 7 years versus 400,000 every month, like it was in like the Pacific during the last year of World War II. It's like, yeah, that's pretty good. But now, if it's World War III and it's for all the marbles, is everybody going to try to minimize civilian casualties, or is it going to be more concerned with like we need to win this as fast as possible? Anything in our path, knock it out. I mean, that's a different story. And I
Yeah.
mean, like I said, like we know the Chinese are thinking about doing a blockade of Taiwan, or how they could do like a submarine blockade of like Japan or whatever. And then we're thinking how we can do a blockade of them. And then, like so much of the world's oil flows through this shipping lane, or so much of the grain capacity goes to this shipping lane. If that gets cut, then, all these countries in this region are going to starve. I mean, it could get very bad very fast. But I mean, it really depends on how everybody plays it. So, I mean,
So I've got 9 minutes left. This should probably be our last one of the night. Even though I enjoy talking to you.
it's like I can't
Is
stand him anymore.
No, dude, I'm just like we could go on and on and on. And I've like I said, I've got no issue of doing that. I just figured you might be in trouble at this point. But so like what's the takeaway? Like okay, hey, you're Donald Trump. You're sitting here in front of NATO head of chief and all this other kind of stuff. And you're sitting there in front of them and you say, "Hey, like here's how we need you to get, or here's what you need to do to get to a position where you are on our side, you're working with us to defeat, you know, our adversaries and probably for them some Russia at some aspect. What policies and what direction would you tell them to take to get to a point where they can kind of stand on their own feet like we talked about?"
To like Europe,
Yeah.
if I was in his shoes and that was my goal, for one, they really got to get. Uh, that's a tough one because it's like, I,
They've already
what
done
I
so much damage.
they've done so much damage, but it's also like, what can they do? Because I mean, like the big one I always go to is like energy policy, because like, yeah, we can sit here, you can do this or that, but if you literally don't have like the gas or the oil or the coal or the nuclear energy to like power these factories, I mean, it's pretty much useless.
Yeah.
So it's like, but they've kind of put themselves in a situation where it's like, okay, they're not getting that energy, or they're getting very little of it from Russia now, and then like their next closest source is the Middle East, and it's like, even if Iran collapses tomorrow, that region's just so much of a clusterfuck anyway.
Yeah.
It's like there's that, and then one thing they've been trying to do in recent years is access more of our liquid natural gas, but now the issue with LNG is it's really expensive. They have to build a lot of specialized infrastructure for it. And even if they went to just using that, it's like, I think like 2 to 3 times more expensive than it was using Russian gas like they did before. So it's like they still would end up in a situation where their energy costs are so much higher that makes their industry so much less competitive.
So
So,
I've heard the plan is to go nuclear.
so that's what the French have
I
done.
know that's
That's
what the
what
French want to do.
the
That's
French are
what they're
like,
already doing.
they're like 70% nuclear.
Yeah.
And then Hungary is about to build, which again, I love Hungary. Hungary is just like, if you're really like addicted to state capacity right now, look up Hungary. Hungary is really impressive. Like they're about to have 80% nuclear energy.
Yeah.
So I mean, they really are aware of like problems, and they're trying their best to like, like Hungary's got all these like policies to boost the marriage rate because they're really trying to boost their fertility rates. I mean, like Hungary is really good for state capacity. But anyway, definitely like that's been a big debate in the EU recently. Like the Germans have been fighting the French almost every step of the way on nuclear. So like
Hmm.
that would definitely be a situation where you need to be like, all right, we need to get on the side of like France, Hungary. It's time to start, being, these Germans are going to have to start taking some hits until they get the message. So definitely
But like,
like
why is Germany against? And maybe we talked about this, but isn't it just like they're against the green, or they're against nuclear because of the Green Party or whatever there, or like they're a huge influence on it or something? Isn't there something
the,
like that
the
that's
Greens are
kind of
definitely a huge influence, but like they're not a majority party. So
okay? They
it's
used to be
like
though. They used to be like a little have a little bigger of a role, right?
they were part of the coalition. I
Yeah.
think they may still be. I'm not sure, but like it still required the SDP and the CDU to go along with it.
Mhm.
So I mean, if the AFD wins or gets in a position, hopefully that'll be one of the things they get is some sanity on like nuclear energy. Um, and there is some good signs. Like Italy, I think is set to overturn its ban. Like a lot of these European nations literally have bans on nuclear energy.
Yeah, which I never
It's
understood. I never understood that. Like that was so dumb.
Chernobyl, Chernobyl.
Well, I mean, I get Chernobyl, but it was kind of like,
It was an overreaction. That's
well,
basically what it
it
was.
definitely was an overreaction, but it's like they were still deeply involved in nuclear research. You know,
Yeah, I
like
mean,
all those consortiums that we had with France and Europe and Russia, like Russia was hugely involved in that. All that consortium, like Europe was still actively involved in it, aside from the French.
yeah, that's it. It doesn't make sense, and that I think that's a big reason why all these things are getting overturned now is because they kind of realize like this was just stupid. Like
So do you
I
think
know
a success in nuclear in Europe will lead to success in nuclear in the United States?
I think we're going to succeed or not on our own merits. I don't think if Europe does this or that it really matters. Like the U.S. is just I don't want to say completely become detached from them, but like we're kind of in such a state. Like I've got a really good friend. He always makes the point. He's like the U.S. has kind of become its own civilization in a sense. Yeah, we were an offshoot of Europe, and now we've kind of developed to the point where we're kind of our own thing.
Hmm.
So I think kind of because you got to think about it like in a general sense. Like originally we were just English colonists, and now we had wave after wave of different European nationalities, and now we've got this from other parts of the world. We've kind of become the word I'm looking for here is ethnogenesis. We've kind of become our own thing. We're no longer just like we're English colonists in the New World. We're
Hmm.
Americans, our own political culture, beliefs, systems, yada yada. Yada. So I don't think, and from being somewhat familiar with the nuclear industry, like I don't think we're not really tied into them in any way. What they do really matters to us. We'll either succeed or we won't, and it'll be because of our own like decisions. But now, insofar as them, I definitely think if I was in Trump's shoes, I'm trying to get them to do something. Like they need to get their energy policy figured out. They need to start making like serious investments in their own defense industrial base. They need to kind of become coherent on what they want to do. And
So what
honestly,
what what part of that is different from what we need to do?
well, for one, we need to figure out our energy situation. Like, as of right now, we're doing pretty good. But like, I think I sent that in the group chat the other day. Like, the shale boom is coming to a close, and once that comes to a close, there's really we're nobody's. I've talked to people in the industry. Like, nobody really knows what comes next because it's
I think
like,
it's gonna be nuclear.
I mean, it's going to have to be to a certain extent, but like, you know, 40% of our energy like usage is for electricity, so we can use nuclear for that. But what about we use oil and asphalt. So how do we maintain our roads? We use oil and plastics. Okay, what replaces plastics? I mean,
And so that's the different part of it. I don't think it's gonna be as big of an issue just because I think the United States is gonna still have supplies to where plastics, raw materials, petrochemicals, all that stuff is gonna be still able to be sourced. It's just like, yeah, we're just not gonna use it for, fuel.
electricity. Yeah,
Yeah, like we're not gonna
but
use it for fuel. But everything else, like, yeah, like we'll be okay.
we need to do an episode. This reminds me on energy in general because like there's
Okay.
a concept I'm not sure you're familiar with. It's EROI, which is economic return on investment,
Hmm.
and it's like really big in the energy sector now because that's a big concern. And I think that's driving a lot of stuff right now. And I think that's one reason they really want to go after Venezuela is because, yeah, we're exhausting the oil here. Well, guess who has the next biggest reserves in the Americas? Venezuela. So it's like
Yeah.
I think that's kind of an underrated factor there. But as far as going back to your original question, like, okay, what's we need to do different? Honestly, I do think energy policy needs to be one. We need to get policy in general. We need to build a. I think we've been so focused on having small government or being neoliberal, and we should just let the free market do this or that in terms of like industrial policy. That like, yeah, if you let the free market decide, obviously paying like low wages in China makes a lot more sense than investing in your workforce here. But I mean, I
Yeah.
think we're going to have to start instituting policies to change that. We're going to have to start working do that. I think we're going to have to make hard choices. Going back to we've talked about before, like our financial situation. Like basically,
this meeting is being recorded.
Go ahead.
it's insofar as so like nuclear. That's a big thing, and like the thing that really irritates me the most about it is like if you go look it up, and I've got the stuff I can send it to you. When we stopped building nuclear reactors after 3 Mile, and that's about basically when we stopped kind of everybody had the overreaction. We were figuring out the cost curve on it. Like we were getting where like with any new thing, there's kind of a learning by doing where the first few times you build something, you do something, it's going to be really expensive just because you're figuring out how to do it. And then once you kind of get the rhythm to it, it's what's the term for it? There's an economics term. It's like where you build something so much, you kind of get the unit cost down. I cannot think of what the term is though. There's a you got to know what I'm talking about. It's like you do it so much, it kind of gets the it's real
I know what
basic
you're talking
economics.
about. You're talking about oh shit, what's it called?
You know what I'm okay. I'm glad you know what I'm talking about, but I cannot think of the term either, and it's killing me now.
It's like basically like when you mass produce something. So like because you
Yeah,
mass produce something, the cost of the individual good is much lower. Economies of
and
scale.
yes,
That's what.
economies of scale. Good job.
Yeah. There you go.
So basically, we were starting to figure it out. And like, if you go and look at it in the modern day, like the Chinese and the South Koreans have like they've like the most recent nuclear power plant we built in the United States was Vogtle down in Georgia, and that's been like the only one we built since like the 80s, I think it was.
No, so we
And
added the one in Chattanooga. So Vodka was like that's the one that was like they did one in like maybe the 2010s and then or they I think it was the 2010s or they just did it. And then they're doing like a part two that they're gonna try to bring online. And
so
that's out towards like
they built
Augusta. And then you've got the one that's in Chattanooga, that was the one before that, and then the one before that was like the 80s. The one in Chattanooga I think was like the
yeah.
mid
So
2000s. Go ahead.
I think I know what you're talking about is so the way they do it, it's like it's not like an entirely new plant. They just build a new
Yes.
unit on site. So it's like I think Vogtle had like its first. I think it currently has 4 units, and they had the 3 come online in like a few years ago, and then they've got the 4th one just come online recently, and they're talking about building like I think 2 more at Vogtle, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think they're going up to 6.
Yeah, so that's about what I thought it was too. So like, yeah, so I mean, like we really stopped building these things, and I've got the data, I've got the stuff. Like they were starting to figure out the economies of scale on it, and then they gave up on it. And
Hmm.
then like so like this, the Asians came in now, and I'm saying Asians because like this, like I said, it's China and South Korea. Like they've got it down to where like I think Vogtle was like I want to say it cost us like 12 billion. I want to say I could be wrong on
Hmm.
that. But I think it's about the South Koreans are building 4 unit facilities for like 2.6 billion. So
Yeah.
like ridiculously cheaper. I mean, it's still expensive, but it's not like it's when you factor in these plants can last for like 80 years, and then like I said, it's like 5 times cheaper than what we're building anyway. I mean, so they've more or less got it figured out, and the French have done a pretty good job on figuring it out too. I think they got it down to where I think they're about 3 billion, so they're a little bit more expensive than the South Koreans, but whatever. So I mean, it is possible to get the economies of scale on these things, and that's you're just going to have to do it. And that's a big thing with like Vogtle was it's what's called an AP 1000. So it's this standardized design that General Electric came up with, and that's what the South Koreans have been doing. They've been building derivatives of AP 1000s, and just where they built it so much, it's like one standardized design. They could do it. And this was a crazy, crazy fact I learned recently, and which explains so much to me, I think personally. So, we started building. I think we started building commercial nuclear power plants. Either it was like the late 50s or like early 60s. So up until I think it was Vogtle, there was not a single.
So we built Watts Bar, which is the one down near Chattanooga in 96. So it was
Okay, I think
between 96 and then it was like Vodkal's not on here, but I think that was like
I want to say like 2019 or something. I think it's 2019ish
let's
or so, or
see.
maybe 2023, maybe.
20 so see, that's the thing where it's like Unit 1 and 2, because Unit 1 was commissioned in 87, Unit 2 was 89, and then 3 was 2013, and 4 was 2024. Or so
For
2023 and
Vox?
then 2024.
For Voctool?
Yes.
Okay, so that's yeah, where they're doing the units thing. So like the crazy fact I learned, pretty much every single power plant up until I think it was either Vogtool or it was like that one in Chattanooga. There was no standardized design. Like
Yeah.
each nuclear power plant was
Everything's
like its own.
custom.
Yeah, and like that's you're not getting economies of scale when everything's different. It's
Well, and
basically
that's what I
you're
was telling you about the regulatory stuff. Like that's got to come into it
yeah
because I was reading something where it was almost like one of the panels or like some of the stuff to like go around the nuclear core. It was like it had to be built in one whole piece, and it couldn't be done in segments. And they were like, if we did it in segments, we could mass produce the shit out of this. But because we do it in one whole thing, we have to have this specialty designed like concrete cast thing that what they got to do.
yeah,
And it was one
and
of those
that's
where it was like, hey, like if you like change that, like you could reduce the cost by like, say 10%. And it wouldn't get down to where it maybe needs to be, but it's much better, and it's those kind of incremental improvements to get it down to where it needs to be.
if I'm not mistaken, what you're talking about, like the concrete cast thing. That I may be wrong on this, but I feel like I've seen something similar to what you've seen, where they looked at it and they're like, yeah, if we just did this mass production, we could like reduce costs by like 25%.
Well, and
It was
I
it
think the
was
other thing is that
it was some crazy number, like it would save costs.
well, right. And so the thing is I think the first phase was or that's basically going to happen is just that they're going to build these massive power plants like they're doing now. And
Mhm.
then they're going to get into the modular stuff, and then you're going to get into the kind of the mid-size where maybe you're going to have one that will specifically build upon really high intense energy projects. So maybe if you're doing smelting aluminum or you're doing some of these other kind of things, maybe having cheap energy on site might be a good thing to do. And I think that's kind of where it's going to go. And I feel like what the issue they had before was that they couldn't really get it to a place where you can really kind of make it mainstream and it's all over the place. And then, like
And
you
then
said,
yeah,
Fukushima and all that other kind of stuff. Well, not
well, see,
Fukushima, but Chernobyl.
and the thing that's so frustrating about a lot of these disasters is it's like Fukushima, like so far they've only been able to directly show like one death. Like after all that, like more people died in the evacuation than died because of like the long term effects of it.
Well,
Like one
and
person.
what irritates me is they're all Gen 2 reactors.
Mhm.
And it's like
And
we're
that
on like 4, maybe 4 plus now. And it's like, okay, like, like we've gone like going from Gen 2 to Gen 3 alone was like leaps and bounds. And so they were like, yeah, and it's like leaps and bounds from 3 to 4, then 4 to even some 4 plus. And it's like it's a completely different nuclear power that honestly we really haven't seen in the United States because we're using
like the
old
whole thing that
antiquated
yeah.
technology. Good.
And like us and the Chinese are working on a lot of different like Gen 4 designs. And like the whole
Yep.
purpose of like Gen 4 is like you could basically put monkeys in charge and it won't melt down. Because like
Exactly.
it's designed to be inherently safe. Like there's almost no plausible like scientific way it can go wrong because it's like the way it's designed, the physics of it, whatever. Uh, so yeah, I mean, and it's just so frustrating because like back in the 70s, like Nixon had what he called like Project Independence, and his plan was like I think it was like like he was planning on like wanting to build like I think it was like 400
Yeah.
nuclear
It
power
was something
plants,
like
and
that. It was like crazy.
it would 100% of our electric, like we would have literally had, I think if all of them had been built based on how electric consumption did eventually work out, like we would have like 100, I want to say like 120% of our current electric needs. So I
Yeah.
mean like, and it's just so frustrating because it could have been so different. And then like, and like and like you mentioned like the modular stuff. That's why SMRs were like there
Yep.
for a second. We're like so people were so interested in them because it's like, oh, if they're small, maybe we can mass produce them. But now, from what I've heard and seen, it's kind of more what you said. Like their big focus now is like, okay, we've got this AP1000 design. The South Koreans have mastered it. We've got experience from Vogtool, and we're obviously going to need so much energy anyway. We really don't need to focus on these small things. We need to get to mass producing the big ones. And it's like, okay, we've got this standardized design. Let's just do that. And there is apparently like a lot of like industrial and tech companies are now
Oh yeah,
like
Google.
you know, talk well, yeah, because like they're data centers, but it's also just like industry in general. Texas is like hardcore. They just passed a law to like aid in the development and advancement and experimentation with like advanced nuclear in their state because they're like so like dead set on getting nuclear industry to be there. I mean, it's there is good signs, but it's just like it's something like the next administration is going to have to focus on. Like they're going to have to be there every step of the way trying to get this done. And to their credit, one thing that I don't think a lot of people know about the first Trump term, which I've always kind of gave him credit for this personally. When he came into office, we were spending like a few hundreds of million. It was like a low amount on like nuclear fusion research, and like almost every single year he increased the budget for that. And then I don't know if you remember that in 2022 where they finally had like the first ignition at that facility out in California. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, I mean, obviously we're a long way away from commercialized nuclear fusion, but to his credit, he was, he consistently increased the budget for ITER out in France. He was consistently increasing the budget for like stuff here doing that. So I mean, I do think the progress we've made in recent years can be thanked to like his administration, like increasing the budget on that. And they do seem pretty interested in nuclear based on what I've heard and seen. Like they do seem kind of, so I mean, there is hope that they will, actually focus on that and get something done on that. I hope for our sake they do. But so, I mean, yeah, so nuclear, definitely need to get nuclear. I definitely think that's also, take it into a wider perspective. Like I said, I think that's one reason why they're suddenly so focused on Venezuela. And I think that's a big reason why he's pushing also for Panama. It's not just the shipping lane and getting the Chinese influence out in the region, but it's also like increasing our forward basing for stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, I do think there's a plethora of factors for that. So
So,
energy,
oh, good. Finish up.
so energy policy, that'd be step one, and then you got to focus on like actual like direct like industrial policy here. Like
Yeah.
we've since the Reagan era, we've been so like laissez-faire that like we've forgotten how to do that, and like they're really going to have to step in and be like, okay, we need to, you know, uh, we need to really refocus college education to more technical side. Like we need more STEM graduates. We need people going in engineering. Like Russia and China are like, I think like combined are like 80 to 90% of the world's engineering graduates. And it's like, yeah, dude, you can have all the humanities majors you want. I mean, like, do whatever, but they're not going to win when your other side has all the engineers.
Yeah.
So, and that's one that we desperately need engineers. We need electricians. I mean, like, even, like, I know it's kind of cliche at this point, like trades, but like, you need a lot of those industrial focused tradesmen for like a prosperous, like, industrial sector. Like, Germany's got a really good program where, like, they're high school graduates. Like they have a college track if that's your goal, but they also have like a apprenticeship tradesman kind of thing. So if you don't want to go to college, they'll help get you in like a something in the industrial sector where like you're apprenticing it, you're learning as you go. You don't have to go to college. They'll teach you like the lower because I mean obviously you need people for not everybody has to be an engineer. You need people on the assembly line, but you also need people that can do like I said, like electrical work, stuff like that. Because I mean, there's a lot to modern industrial manufacturing. So I mean, like definitely need to get programs there. Like I think a lot of our problem is, like I said, since like the '80s, we've just been like, oh, we'll just leave it and let them figure it out. And it's like you really can't do that anymore. Like it's just it the financial incentives aren't there. You need to put the financial incentives there, but you also need to be realistic about like when the Russians launched Sputnik back in the 50s, Eisenhower didn't just sit there and like, okay, well, whatever, we'll let them figure it out. Like they passed like programs to like get, get the educated force we needed to do stuff like that. We put the incentives out there. I mean, we need to go back to that kind of thinking.
So we'll finally end it for the night. I 100% agree with everything you just said, and that's why, for me, if you were to say, Andrew, okay, you've got 3 bills that you're going to pass, which ones are they in what order? I'd say the first one is always going to be some sort of infrastructure thing, Um, you know, just generally that. That's it. The second one is education, where we got to start shifting people into the trades, electricians, construction contractors, etc. And then the reason why is because that third one should be an energy bill, and you're going to need people to build the infrastructure, and you need people to build the energy, and you know you have to have that education piece to really kind of tie it all together and to have the workforce that we need. And I think if you do that and you deploy it, I think you can really get some stuff to go gangbusters. And I think that would cement a lot of these core national security issues. I think it would cure it. So we'll go ahead and leave it there. I definitely think, I mean, shit, I'm not doing anything tomorrow, but we can always talk about energy sometime, and can be a whole nother video. But it looks like we got about four. I think it was about 4 episodes here on Europe and the broader strategic situation. So we'll leave it there, and we'll talk some other time, Austin, and then we'll do some other foreign policy and energy and all that other kind of good stuff.
All right, we'll do it.
All right, sounds good.